A mindful approach can really inspire innovation at a company and then inspire growth. If it's nonstop, back to back to back to back to busy, you're not going to be as innovative as you want to be.
Welcome back to the Mindfulness in Politics project. Today, we are super excited to have H.L. Ray, who is a leadership coach, a business strategist, an impact investor, works with all kinds of organizations and communities, and has really had a lot of success and benefit from incorporating a lot of the kinds of practices and strategies that we've been talking about.
Yeah, Josh, when I first started my consulting business, I knew that I needed some help. Not only setting up the nuts and bolts of like, how do you run a company and what do you do? It's nothing I've done before, but also someone who had a background in and an understanding of mindfulness and how mindfulness can be applied towards leadership, towards establishing a real firm foundation for when you're launching a new venture. And so I was so fortunate to work with HL during those early days. And I'm so excited to have him as a guest and as part of our project. HL, welcome to the Mindfulness in Politics project.
Hi, it's so good to be here, and I'm thrilled with this offering that y'all are putting out into the world. It's so needed, and I'm excited to dig in more for the conversation.
We work in very high stressed environments where you have so much incoming. And oftentimes, the skills of mindfulness are seen as kind of a nice to have if
Mhm.
you have some time, but not a real requirement. And so, when you are sitting across or you're coaching a very busy type A CEO leader, how do you connect those dots for why mindfulness and mindfulness practice is so essential and ultimately why it will help them do a better job?
Using myself as the example, I led brand marketing, my last big corporate role for the US team at Samsung. Amazing role, loved my team, and also very busy, double booked, triple booked, and I found myself kind of glorifying it in a way. Like I am triple booked, so I'm this important. And at the same time, I was exhausted working 70, 80 hours a week. And I stumbled into this meditation studio in the West Village called Mindful, started like literally collapsing into the studio during my lunch hour, and slowly, by making space, realizing the power of being proactive with my time and how that changed me as an individual, how I held space for other folks. It's not even always about how many minutes I'm meditating a day. It's actually um, off the cushion and into the world. Like, how am I able to be present in my day to day life? Which is the thing that was transformative to me. And I see that as transformative to leaders and individuals. Because ultimately, what it leads to is people saying, I feel better. I'm happier with my career. I'm happier in my relationships. I've started my business. I've quieted the saboteur. But it doesn't start with me pushing this. It starts by listening and working with the individual to figure out what works for them.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you bring up the fact that there's not a single way to approach this. It's not about necessarily sitting on a cushion and meditating, although it can be if that's helpful for you. But that's really something we've tried to build into what we're trying to offer people, which is this notion that everyone is going to have a different way of engaging with their lives and with this kind of approach, but it doesn't require you to really fundamentally change who you are or what your natural tendencies are. And so I wanted to ask you about, I assume that almost by definition, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that the most of the people that you work with are pretty ambitious and driven people. They probably wouldn't be with
Mhm.
you if they weren't really goal focused and looking for help with that. And I think we know that ambition can be really great in that it really drives us to squeeze the most out of our lives as we can and potentially achieve some goals that can be really meaningful. But it also can really lead to that hustle culture that can be really so toxic. And I think all of us in our work have experienced and found to not always be conducive to a sense of well-being and a happy life. And so I'm curious how you coach people on what to do with that ambition, if there are good or bad forms of it, and what kind of relationship we should have with that innate drive that forces us to keep going.
I think ambition, if channeled properly, can be very fulfilling. One of my coaches and mentors named Amina Altai wrote a book called The Ambition Trap. And she talks a lot about the difference between ambition that is very depleting and ambition that is purposeful, and acknowledging the types of activities and behaviors that lead to each one. And just by making space to call that out, you're able to see the difference. And to me, that is a mindful approach to ambition. Another thing I also say is I definitely was one of them and still can be fall into the ambition trap myself after doing all this work, to say, I'm so busy. I don't have time for these activities that I've defined as very grounding for me because I'm too busy on social media, whatever it may be. And I have to hold myself accountable to making that space on a recurring basis so that I don't fall into that I'm too busy, I'm too busy. And my coach actually told me that years ago. She was like, "You're successful and ambitious at what cost?" And the cost was to, I'm exhausted. I don't feel in alignment. And so she's like, you can keep going like this. Like that could absolutely be your story and you'll be quote unquote successful on paper. But if you don't change anything now, nothing is going to change. So it's important to say, we live in this world. It is hard and you could just keep going down this road. But if you want something different, there are things that you can do and sort of redefine ambition for yourself. And the last thing I'll say to that is even working with teams on their strategies. When we talk about innovation, the way innovation comes, it comes from having space, right? To dream and have bad ideas and good ideas and discussions, and a mindful approach can really inspire innovation at a company and then inspire growth. If it's nonstop, back to back to back to back to busy, you're not going to be as innovative as you want to be. And so a lot of times it's just as simple as stating that.
You're zeroing in, I think, on these two pieces when you think of mindfulness. One is space and one is presence. So space to, as you're saying, be more creative, approach a challenge from a different kind of maybe direction in order to produce a better goal. And then being present, right? Being present in your own life and being present in the moment as opposed to being guided by that what has happened in the past or that what has happened in the future. I'm curious from your personal experience, as someone who worked in a high pressure job in the corporate world, who was overscheduled and super busy, how your life changed when you fell into that mindfulness class
Mhm.
in New York City. Just some of the very tangible benefits of the practice and what led you, it sounds like, to really reimagine the kind of work you do and how you do it.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you perfectly said, space to be present is it. Whether you are an individual looking to change things in your personal life, if you're looking to grow your organization, nothing changes without that space to be present. I think for me, where it led me to is exactly where I am today, right? And if I would have not taken that journey, I think I would have continued to be successful on paper, but out of alignment with what I feel my purpose is. And and I do think it's important to offer tangible tools. Igor, for business leaders and leaders at large, I use a tool called Positive Intelligence, which is a very tangible tool that's an entry point into being present, whether that's you're running to the subway and you want to take 2 breaths to gather yourself, it offers that. And always what I see is with the little opening comes the desire for more and more and more.
That's such a good point. I really want to talk to you about authenticity because I feel like, especially in some of these really competitive career fields that our audience comes from in politics, in media. I know as a television correspondent, there's so much pressure on TV to sort of be a certain persona and to build yourself up in certain ways that you think your audience, your clients, the base that you serve, or an actual audience on television, what you think they sort of want from a person. And spiritual traditions will often talk about this in terms of really creating a constructed self that then becomes separate not only from you but from the people that you're trying to interact with. So I'm really curious, in your experience working with leaders, what effect that need to sort of put on a certain mask as opposed to being authentic can have, and how some of these types of approaches can really help to bridge that gap.
The reason why we put on masks is because we've been taught that's how you get ahead. That's how you make it. If you're from, especially if you're from any marginalized identity. So I always like to say, of course you do that. Of course you have this negative self-talk. Of course you say you can't show up the way you are because that's what we've been taught. Maybe going all the way back to the playground, right? I can use myself as an example. Growing up in small town Alabama, I was learning early on how to mask to be accepted and to make it through. But I think that the power of creating space for yourself allows us to go inward and to listen to our true voice. What if there were no bad ideas? What if you are in spaces that are safe? How would you show up? And that's what space provides. That's what going inwards provides.
So this is super helpful. I think sometimes people understand the concepts that we're talking about, but they have a hard time figuring out exactly how that integrates or what it actually looks like in practice. Can you give us an example of maybe someone that you've worked with, something that you saw in someone that they were able to address or work on through this kind of approach, and then how that actually tangibly worked out in their lives?
There are a bunch of different examples that I could give in the types of clients that I have. I think one that is helpful to share is that um, nothing external changed with this person other than they shifted their mindset within their corporate role and therefore found so much peace of mind to the point where we could complete our coaching path, right? And so this person works at a very high powered tech company, very innovative, and could not stop thinking about work, working all the time, working on the weekends, being anxious about work. And at first, we thought that he would need to leave that role in order to find a way to ground. And what he found by offering, these tools that I've talked about, which are very tangible mindfulness tools that do not take much time, as well as assessments like assessing one's strengths. By doing that, we were able to develop this sense of confidence so that you're not constantly trying to prove yourself. You're actually very confident in what you offer and you create boundaries for yourself. And he didn't leave the company. He actually grew, began managing people, and is still there today. And so it doesn't always mean that, like me, like my path led me to starting my own company and leaving the corporate world. It's not always like that for everyone's. My journey doesn't have to be your journey, but it's what do you want in your life? That's the important thing. It's not about, honestly, the exact journey of mindfulness. It's what do you want in your life and how do we create space for you to get there? And the secret is that tools in mindfulness help you get there. But that's an example that I like to share, that it's not always about making these drastic career moves. It can be if that's what you want, but it really can just be this inner work that makes you more confident and you end up growing and staying in your corporate role.
HL Ray is a leadership coach, business strategist, and impact investor. HL, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you again so much for this gift that you're offering to the world. We need more of these conversations, and I'm looking forward to following along.